We're here in my backyard. We're going to pull some honey today, and here's kind of what I use most of the time to pull the honey. Got a bee brush here, use it sometimes. Got a smoker. Of course, we got the hive tool, and I usually have an extra box handy to put the frames in because every super is not completely full of honey usually, so I kind of mix and match there, and we'll explain that in a minute. So we're going to try and get a few off of these hives back here today. I pulled some yesterday from different locations, and we got a nice little harvest. Maybe not quite as much as I expected, but it's going to be okay. So here we are in the backyard. We're going to harvest some honey today. Now, typically when I harvest honey, I go ahead and wear my jacket, my ventilated jacket, and I go ahead and wear gloves because the bees many times are not super excited about you taking their honey. Now I do have a queen excluder on this hive right here. This hive and the 2 hives over, I have queen excluders on. These bees seem to do just fine with that queen excluder. So let's open this up and see what we have here. I'm going to kind of show you a couple ways to do it. There's a couple methods that work pretty well. I use the bee brush occasionally, or I sometimes will just shake the bees either down in the hive or in front of the hive, and they'll just crawl back up in the hive. So it usually works pretty well. Sometimes it gets a little exciting. They won't be too bad today. It is a little cloudy, so we'll see what we got today. We'll see what the temperament is with these bees. I'm pretty particular to make sure the honey is pretty much close to 100% capped. I think if it's 80-90% capped either on a frame or in the entire box, I'll go ahead and take it. So in other words, if we have the 8 or 9 center frames, the 8 center frames are fully capped, and then the end frames are either partially or just the outside is not capped, I'll go ahead and take those. But looking in this first box here, looks like we have maybe a couple of frames that are ready to go. The top box. Not a lot of bees up in here, but these bees are really good honey producers. They do really well. So this is what capped honey looks like for those who may not be aware. The bees fill the cells with nectar like that, and then they put a wax capping over it. I call that frame 90% capped, 80-90% capped, which is fine. Same on this side. So there's not many bees on there. So I'll just kind of go ahead and shake the bees that are on there off. Maybe use a brush to gently get that one little bee off. And then set it down in this box. This box is not fully ready to harvest, so I won't be able to take more than 1 or 2 frames out of here. I think we'll leave the rest of those for the future. So this next one, I may have had too many boxes on here because they really kind of filled the frames up through the center, it looks like. Once again, there's a queen excluder on here, so and there aren't a ton of bees up here, so I'm not overly concerned about injuring bees. So I'm going to go ahead and start here in the middle where I see the honey, and that frame once again is ready to go. Beautiful frame of honey. It's ready to go, and sometimes you can just shake them. So you can use the bee brush. You can also shake them or bump them in front of the hive, and they'll end up going back in the hive. It doesn't injure the bees, and it works perfectly well. Yeah, we're gonna probably get 8 or 10 frames at least out of this hive. I can already see down into the next box. The frames look like they have quite a bit of honey on them. So these bees right here are not at all intimidated about going through that queen excluder. Some bees, it seems like, just prefer not to. These bees have filled these frames up pretty well. There's not a lot of bees up in here, so I wonder if the bees have either swarmed recently or maybe they have, I don't know. But they sure have packed some honey in here. Okay, this is probably about, I would say maybe 60% capped on this side, but since those frames are so full of honey, you can go ahead and take it. It should be okay. Another just kind of a test you can do, some may disagree with me on this, but you can kind of shake it like this. And if the nectar stays or the honey stays in the cells and doesn't splash out, I'll go ahead and take it. Now, if it's fresh nectar and you do that, quite a bit of it, or some of it will just fall down onto the frames below, and you'll know it's still too moist. But if none comes out, then you're pretty good. And I really don't see any significant nectar on these frames where I just shook that. So yeah, we're similar story here. Looks like we're ready to go. So we're already up to 5 frames. And in my experience, just the last few years doing this, that frame's not quite ready. It seems like about 2 supers worth of honey, on average for me at least, ends up being about a 5-gallon bucket of honey. Now these frames here look kind of interesting. These are they're called plastic cell frames. That are, the little cells are pre-made for the bees. And I ordered some of these last year to try them out, and they worked pretty well. That one's not quite ready to go. They're extremely easy to harvest because you just take a flat surface like a putty knife, and you can rub it right along the surface of these frames, and it just decaps them very easily, and then you just spin the honey out. That one's not quite ready, I don't think. Maybe it is. We'll go ahead and take it. There are not a lot of bees in this hive, I'm afraid. They might have swarmed. Haven't seen any swarms hanging around lately, but I think these bees have swarmed. So this might be about all the honey we get out of them this year. So we're probably going to get a super's worth. Last year this hive was one of my better ones. Really produced quite a bit of honey last year. These frames are fun to, as long as they build the honey out on the sides, they're fun to harvest. Now if you put them in there too close together, the bees don't fill them out. They don't increase the width of the frames, and then it's kind of difficult because they'll cap them inside the cells, and so then you got to figure out how to penetrate the cappings, and we just use a roller to do that, but it's a little more difficult. So yeah, we're gonna have let's get a complete super of honey out of here. I end up with about 10 frames, which is a full box. And I actually put, on most of my hives, I put 9 frames once they have them drawn out. And then, a couple of advantages to that, they actually, I think, put more honey in a box if you do that. And secondly, overall equipment costs can be lower because you only have 9 frames in a box instead of 10. So every 9 or 10 boxes, you basically have enough frames saved over in another box. So really not a lot of bees in here, so I'm a little disappointed in that, but I am happy with the honey they put in here. So I'm going to leave everything else. There is some uncapped honey left in here, uncapped honey and nectar. I'm going to take this box and get it harvested, spun out, and then I usually will put the frames back on the hives, let the bees clean them out and refill them. We've had our first big flow of the year around here. That's privet, and there's other things that bloom in the spring. We're in a little bit of a lull right now, but here coming in shortly will be the tallow flow, which is a really big flow. The bees really do well with that. So that, in the last few years, seems to have been my biggest flow each year. Once that's over, then we got to get ready for next year. We'll have a little bit coming in from different things, but it really drops off. So here in Alabama, where I live, we'll typically harvest mid to late May, or just sometime in May whenever we're ready to get some. Just leave them alone for about a month and check back, and then harvest mid to late June. And then if there's anything capped, or if there's enough to take some in August, late July, early August, I'll do that. And then I typically leave the fall honey for the bees to have for the winter. And I also have started feeding more in the winter. Feeding and treating quite a bit. It seems to have helped my survival rate throughout the winter. So that's how I do things. I also use a fume board at times with honeybee gone. I left it in another location yesterday. And this hive, well, I wouldn't have used it because there are not tons of bees, but some hives, as you get down in the hive further, there's tons of population. It's really just kind of hard to get all the bees off of the frames, and so I'll put the fume board on top and let it sit a few minutes while I kind of break into another hive and check it out. And when I come back, the bees are pretty much all rushed down to the next super. It takes minimal effort to get what few bees are left off those frames. Usually they're pretty much all gone. So you can, especially if it's a box that's completely full of honey, that works extremely well. You can just put the fume board on for a few minutes, especially if it's kind of hot. Honeybee gone repels the bees down out of that super. You take it off and take it. What I'll do now is I'll move some of these empty frames of comb over in here, fill this box completely up, and get the 2 boxes that are left here will be full of comb, and then I'll have an empty box to move on to these next hives and fill it up as we go. So that's kind of how I do it. I know there are tons of different ways to do it, but that's what I do. Kind of my method of getting the honey off of the hives. One thing I wanted to mention as well is that it's always a good idea, if you see over here, I've got a lid. Especially if the bees are super active and busy and you're in a highly populated area of bees, you want to put the lid on here. I've already got that box ready to put some more frames in, but after you get done, you want to put the lid on or something on, a cover, to keep the bees out, because if the bees are super active, and they may get that way here in a little bit, they'll be all in that honey trying to rob it out pretty quickly once you get those frames in there. So I just wanted to mention that real quick and make sure you understood that. We're going to move on to the next video.